Do you have difficulty offering yourself grace and compassion and understanding and patience and love? Do shame and guilt from past experiences still make you feel ashamed and like you're a bad person? Do you have secrets that you would be mortified by if they were uncovered about you? Do you get hung up on your mistakes and your shortcomings? And do you struggle to get past your past failures? Those are all signs of being unable to forgive yourself or practice self-forgiveness. Welcome to The Simple Source, your source for all things self-love, self-healing, personal growth, and spirituality. I'm your host, Linda Valines. I used to be chronically sick and unhappy. I spent years trying anything and everything to heal, but I never got better. It wasn't until my late husband was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer that I finally stopped searching for the answers outside of myself and turned within. I taught myself how to truly love and heal myself, how to finally be authentically healthy and happy, mind, body, and soul. I have over 10 years of personal and professional self-healing and teaching experience. I'm a trauma-informed, certified holistic health and wellness coach, certified Ayurveda counselor, and author. I healed myself of a lifetime of complex traumas and chronic conditions with joy and ease. Now I'm teaching you to do the same. So if you're ready to heal and love yourself more, mind, body, and soul, without all the struggle and stress, and with more joy and productivity, join me to liberate your highest, healthiest, and happiest self and learn how to thrive more simply. Let's get started with today's episode. Forgiveness is one of the most healing and liberating and empowering and self-loving things that we can do for ourselves, but so many people get hung up about forgiveness, especially when it's self-directed. So in this episode, I'm going to discuss why self-forgiveness is so valuable to a productive and enjoyable healing journey, and how you can begin to practice forgiving yourself with more ease and confidence so that you can have a more productive and joyful healing journey. If you have difficulty forgiving yourself, then that innately means that you love yourself conditionally, meaning you only give yourself love or believe that you are lovable under certain conditions. In other words, the love that you give and that you feel for yourself is dependent on external circumstances and validations. And if those conditions or those circumstances and that validation are not met, then you don't believe that you're lovable, whole, or enough. And that's why forgiving yourself is so challenging, because there's a wounded part of yourself that's running the show that doesn't believe that you deserve grace and compassion and patience and understanding and love, that you deserve those things under certain conditions. I went to this women's group a while ago, and the topic of the women's circle, that's what I meant to say. If I said group, I meant to say women's circle. I went to this women's circle, and the topic of the evening was forgiveness. And I was really, what's the right word here? It wasn't like terribly surprising, but it was also maybe like sad. Literally every single person had an issue with forgiveness, meaning they were unable to fully forgive themselves or other people. And forgiveness is oddly a bit of a controversial topic. When I write about it, when I post content about it, there's inevitably like a person or two that gets heated by what I say when I say forgiveness is really about loving yourself. It's an act of self-love, and it doesn't have anything to do with the other person, because people don't want to forgive people. And so they will make excuses for that inability to let go of that resentment or the negative feelings or the judgments, i.e. whatever has been unresolved emotionally, psychologically for them. And so it's like forgiveness means that they can see to someone else who wronged them or abused them or hurt them, and it just like completely misses the point. So that is also a direct reflection when you hold that idea that only certain people are worthy of your forgiveness, deserve forgiveness, that's just a mirror to your relationship with yourself. Because if you are able to unconditionally forgive yourself, then you are able to unconditionally forgive another person. That's why I started this podcast episode talking about conditional self-love. Because if that's also how you relate to the people in your life, it doesn't matter if you know them or don't know them. It doesn't matter if they're your family or friends or a stranger that was like a dick to you one day, or if you were like assaulted or something awful like that happened to you. None of that really matters in terms of your ability to show up for yourself in this life that your soul chose to be and learn and grow through. None of that matters in terms of whether or not any of us deserve love. We all deserve unconditional love, regardless of what we've done, who we are, where we've been, fill in the blank. That's just our innate birthright as a living human being. And so when you withhold that love from another person, that means that you are also withholding that love from yourself. That is a direct reflection of the manifestation of like you being hard on yourself. Like if you think you being hard on yourself is a productive way to be self-motivated for change and for growth or for healing, which inevitably means that you entertain negative self-talk or self-shaming or self-judging, that means you're self-harming, friend. And you can't be self-harming and also self-healing. And so our outer world really is just a reflection of our inner world. And so if we have difficulty forgiving ourselves, of course, we're going to have difficulty forgiving other people. And again, I'm not going to talk about it in this episode in depth because I did speak about it in the unconditional self-love episode. And I'll say this all the time too, throughout this podcast. You'll hear me say this over and over again in my work. Our outer world is just a reflection of our inner world. And that's not like a little percentage of it. It's all of it. Because our entire reality is subjective. Our reality is seen and experienced and lived through our eyes, through our body, through our consciousness, through our soul. And so the issue of forgiveness is really fascinating to me because it's such a projection of our relationship with our own shadows. And so if you have difficulty forgiving yourself, that means you have a lot of unintegrated shadow. So your shadow is the part of yourself. I'll do a whole other episode about shadow work because it's so juicy and it's so healing and it's so good. But your shadow is the part of you that you deny, that you reject, that you think is unlovable. So if you have difficulty forgiving yourself, you are probably contending with your shadow, the parts of yourself that you deem like unlovable, unworthy, ugly, and not deserving of grace and compassion, understanding, and patience and love. That also means that you have a challenging time with your heavier emotions because shadow and shame, they just go hand in hand because that's why you're denying and hiding and avoiding and rejecting those aspects of yourself because you're ashamed of them. They've caused you pain. They were rooted in experiences that were traumatic that you haven't resolved. And so there's like guilt or grief or anger that you haven't processed connected to those parts of yourself that you are unable to forgive. Your emotional life is probably really tumultuous and unstable, meaning that you have like a really tight, firm noose around your emotions because you're trying to control your emotional state because you're uncomfortable with the full range of your emotions because you deem certain emotions negative, low vibe, unacceptable. All of that is just previous conditioning, but all of those emotions that you deny are connected to the parts of yourself that you also deny, i.e. your shadow. So that's why when people have difficulty forgiving yourself, and also, which is just the same thing as difficulty forgiving another person, it really is just like a direct mirror of the parts of yourself, your shadow parts that you have rejected and denied. And ultimately, need your love. That's why our shadow aspects are reflected to us. It's the universe going, hey, you chose to be embodied in this life so your soul could learn and evolve. And these are the lessons that you chose on a soul level to learn. So we're going to give you opportunities to learn those lessons and grow and evolve as you intended in this life. So when we get reflected our own shadows back to us from other people, from the world, from stressful situations that activate unresolved traumas, we're being invited to witness, to see, to honor, and love those parts of ourselves. And if we're unable to do that for whatever reason, it could be that you're not on a healing journey. It could be that you just started on a healing journey. It could be that your healing journey is being directed by someone who doesn't know how to heal productively. There's so many reasons why you don't have a healthy and healing relationship with the parts of yourself that you deem unlovable, i.e. your shadow, and then all the emotions that are connected to it. So when you have difficulty forgiving yourself and difficulty forgiving other people, what I've been trying to lead up to here, I've mentioned it a few times, but there's an unresolved trauma there that's causing you to hold on to that resentment or those judgments or whatever it is that's causing resistance to making peace, letting go, resolving, and releasing. And that is your wounded self. And trauma is really subjective for everybody. So the reasons that we put aspects of ourselves into these pockets of our existence, into these little shadows where we're like, no one can see it. These ugly and hateful parts of myself are tucked away, locked away, and I can just forget about them. That's like the subconscious sort of reasoning for putting parts of ourselves in our shadow because we don't want to see them and we don't want other people to see them. What that means though, when you're self-rejecting and self-abandoning, which is what that is, you are abandoning parts of yourself, you're abandoning aspects of your past that need healing, that need attention, that need love. You're rejecting parts of yourself that you deem ugly and shameful. When you do that, you are operating from a trauma narrative, and that innately means that you are being run by some unresolved trauma that is also indicative of you operating from nervous system dysregulation. Anytime we're showing up through a trauma response or we're relating to ourselves, to other people, to the world, to our environment in an agitated, dysregulated manner, it just means that some past trauma is at the helm. The wounded self, the wounded inner child, the wounded outer child, the unintegrated shadow that feels ashamed and bad and ugly. Essentially, your past is running your present life still, the parts of your past that you haven't resolved. That's also just indicative of you not feeling safe. That is on a nervous system level, when you're stuck in nervous system dysregulation because you have unresolved traumas. Again, trauma is subjective. It doesn't mean huge. It could have been an emotional abandonment wound. It could have been anything that has caused your wounded inner child. Let's just go right there because it's probably the person, the being that it's like, nope, gonna hide, gonna tuck away, gonna not be seen. So I don't get shamed and I don't get punished or whatever. When you're showing up in a dysregulated way, that innately means that you are not feeling safe in yourself or in the world. That is what unresolved trauma does. And there's going to be a whole episode about that next. But for now, what that means is you have all of these negative emotions and negative experiences that haven't been fully processed, that haven't been fully felt and given your love and healed and released. And thus your brain and your body have been hijacked by those trauma narratives that have been unresolved, and then their related limiting beliefs that belong to your wounded inner child, likely, that is keeping you stuck in patterns that just like keep you from being able to truly love the parts of yourself that need to be loved. And when those parts of yourself are loved, like you can then be free of the resentment and the negativity and the heaviness and all of those judgments, because you're no longer being run by unseen and unchallenged fears, i.e. unresolved trauma. So when you have difficulty forgiving yourself, it's really your wounded self that's in charge. I hope that we've gotten here in a way that's made sense. It's your wounding that says this part of me is unlovable and doesn't deserve grace and doesn't deserve understanding and needs to always be shamed and judged. It's not your authentic self that believes that. And when that's happening, when you're like having difficulty forgiving yourself for whatever reason or for whatever, there's likely a lot of inner conflict going on, like a very exhaustive inner tug of war that's going to leave you feeling drained, that's going to leave you feeling frustrated. And that within itself like perpetuates this stuckness and these cycles of ups and downs in healing that are really unproductive and that make healing unenjoyable. And it's all because your wounded self is running the show. And when your wounded self is running the show, that means that your ego and your unresolved fears are running the show. And so of course you're not going to be making a lot of healing progress. And that frustration of being stuck, that inner conflict, that not feeling at peace with yourself or at harmony with yourself, paired with the exhaustion from living in nervous system dysregulation, innately means that your capacity to heal is stunted and your ability to thrive is diminished because you're essentially imprisoned by walls of your own self-loathing and self-criticism and self-judgment. And that feels shitty. And then that perpetuates more self-shaming and putting yourself down, and it just gets reinforced and reinforced. I remember what that is like because I used to hate myself and pretended that I didn't and pretended that I was like, a badass or whatever, developed all of these coping mechanisms, exterior facades, a lot of armor to hide all of those shadow parts that I rejected and deemed unlovable, to hide all of the unresolved trauma that I had totally turned my head away from so that I could avoid and not feel. I remember what that was like. And all of that self-loathing and the self-criticism and the self-judgment on a constant basis is so exhausting. And there's no way that we can be at peace with ourselves when we're existing like that, when that is the type of relationship that we have with ourselves. When we are showing up for ourselves with contempt, with a lot of judgment, with a lot of limitations and a lot of parameters for what's acceptable and unacceptable, there's just no way for you to be at peace in your own life and with yourself that way. And it doesn't even matter if the incident is small or large that you're hung up on with yourself about. It doesn't matter, right? Because it's all for your nervous system and for your brain and for your body. It's all the same stress response. It's all dysregulation. And over time, your literal brain and body deteriorate because of all of those denied, suppressed emotions, because of that self-directed resentment and disappointment and hate and rage, all of that self-harm. Eventually, your brain and your body are going to get compromised in terms of their health and the vitality. I mean, sometimes it takes a while, sometimes it doesn't. I developed chronic conditions when I was really young because of so much trauma, constant all the time. And those chronic conditions stayed with me for decades until I learned how to heal and really ultimately unconditionally love myself. That was the key. But I was rarely at peace. I mean, I remember what that's like. Every day it was so stressful. And it wasn't necessarily my outer world. Again, our outer world is just a reflection of our inner world. It was because inside there was no peace. There was so little love for myself, if any. If there was love for myself, it was so superficial. It was conditional, right? It was based on conditions. And with that little piece within, then of course there was no real genuine joy and no real genuine clarity or confidence. And if I did feel at ease, it was because of something outside of myself, right? It was all external validation that gave me permission to relax. It was never me going, you know what? You can let this go. This does not matter at all in the end. But that's because I didn't feel safe within myself. I needed something outside of myself to give me permission to feel safe. So when I learned how to love myself unconditionally, I taught myself how to heal myself. I finally understood that I'm the only one who controls whether or not I am at peace. I'm the only one who can control whether or not I feel safe. It doesn't matter what's going on outside. We could be at war. Hopefully we're not. I mean, there is war right now. It's all very tragic and sad, but it really doesn't matter what's going on outside. We have the ultimate control over our inner world. And because our outer world is just a reflection of our inner world, we can change the circumstances of our outer world simply by changing the circumstances of our inner world, which is really just changing our relationship with ourselves. And when I learned that I didn't need anything or anyone to change outside of myself to feel safe, to relax, to stress less, to love myself, when I realized that, and then I took action upon that truth, I finally regained command of my mind, my body, and my soul, which meant that I opened the door to true, genuine peace because I had liberated myself. Forgiveness is liberation. That's what it is. It's your liberation from resentment, from anger, from blame, from the need for external validation, from codependency, from all of that outdated trauma, fear, and limiting beliefs and narratives that just speak lies. They speak falsities about you not being good enough, you not being lovable, you not being good or worthy. Forgiveness is freeing yourself from that chokehold of that immature ego and your wounded false self so that you can rise to meet this moment, show up for yourself and for your life as your authentic and highest self, who knows with complete and unwavering certainty that you are deserving of love, that you are deserving of grace and compassion and understanding and patience, regardless of any and all. That's what unconditional love is. And we all deserve that. And until you do shadow work and until you learn to look at the pieces of yourself that you deem ugly and shameful and unlovable, you can't forgive yourself. You can't truly love yourself. You can't unconditionally love yourself. And then that innately means that your ability to unconditionally love others is also stunted. And you may not want to hear that. People don't like it when I say that, but it's true. That doesn't mean that you won't be able to unconditionally love another person, but it means that that unconditional love has limits because your ability to unconditionally love yourself has limits. If you want to learn how to forgive yourself, you also have to, in addition to learning to unconditionally love yourself and learning to do shadow work, which I'm not going to get into again this episode, but I will in another, so stay tuned for that. In addition to that, and really taking ownership of the fact that your outer world really is a reflection of your inner world, you have to come to the understanding that your actions don't define you. This is also like reconciling your wounded self from your authentic self, your trauma narratives from your highest truth. Like what you do is not your identity. Your past does not define you. Your mistakes do not define you. You have to come to an understanding of who you actually really are. And I call this self-knowing. I call this coming home to your truth. Because if you allow your trauma narratives and your wounded self to dictate how much love you feel for yourself, how much love you give yourself, then you can never be free. You can never truly heal because that's an innately limiting existence, and healing by definition is a reclamation of your freedom and your wholeness. So when you defend the self-harm, self-abandoning, self-rejection of the contention between being able to forgive yourself and not forgiving yourself, and do those parts of myself even deserve to be forgiven, or do I just go on hating them for the rest of my life because I was so shitty and such a bad person at that moment in life, that one moment in life that you are now going to identify your entire existence by. And you may not do that on a conscious level, but that is what's happening. That's why you're withholding, because for some reason you have identified, when I say for some reason, that just means some unresolved trauma. And because trauma is subjective, that's very individualistic to you. For some reason, a part of you that's rooted in fear, that's rooted in shame or guilt or unresolved anger or grief or whatever, believes that you are broken, that you are not good enough, that you are incompetent, that you're ugly, fill in the blank. When you hold those beliefs on a subconscious level, because that's where they live, you can't expect your outer world to reflect anything different, which means that genuine health and happiness and healing and realizing your full potential and all the prosperity that you deserve is just not going to happen, because that fear and shame that live in you on a subconscious level go, no, you don't deserve that. No, you're not worthy of that. That's what's really happening when you're unable to forgive yourself. That unresolved fear, that unresolved shame, all of those beliefs in your brokenness and your inadequacy and your ugliness and your limitations and your unlovability are stunting your true potential, i.e. your truth. So if you want to stop being held back by self-loathing and self-criticism and self-judgment, then you have to commit to resolving those fears, to resolving your traumas, to developing emotional health, to meeting your shadow, meaning the parts of yourself that you don't want to look at. It's time to look at them instead of avoiding and denying and suppressing those parts of yourself, because they're blocking you. They're blocking your ability to love yourself. They're blocking your ability to heal yourself. They're blocking your ability to truly thrive and live the life that your soul intended to live in this existence. And so if you want to learn how to forgive yourself without all that inner conflict, without all that struggle and that waging war that I described earlier that happens within, then you've got to prioritize a self-love practice. You have to develop emotional intelligence. You have to develop emotional maturity. You have to develop a healing relationship with yourself. And that includes your fears and your traumas and your wounded aspects of self, your inner child, your outer child, your shadow, so that you can reconnect with your authentic self and detach from those wounded identities and narratives that are keeping you stuck in perceived limitation, meaning only parts of me are lovable. Only parts of me are worthy of forgiveness and grace and compassion and understanding. You've got to be willing to heal that victim consciousness. And you've got to be willing to heal the need to blame and to point fingers, because that doesn't help healing, but rather hinders our ability to heal. When we just do this, what we're doing when we blame, and I'm pointing my finger for everybody who's listening and not watching, when we point fingers and we blame and we hold on to that victim consciousness, we are innately showing up for our healing and for ourselves and for our lives in a disempowered way. We're deflecting from taking ownership of our own well-being, and relieving someone of fault doesn't mean that what they did, if they fucked up, if they harmed you, if they hurt you, if they abused you, it doesn't mean that it negates that. Just like we can hold two emotions at the same time, we can feel grief and also joy. We can acknowledge that someone harmed us and hurt us, and we can understand their accountability in that experience while also taking accountability for our own well-being in order to heal. Those two things can coexist. Also, if you want to learn to forgive yourself with ease and grace, then you've got to develop self-trust. You have to become empowered, is what that is, which is why, that victim consciousness, it's you, your fault. I'll never forgive you. I won't let go of the helplessness and the powerlessness. When you hold on to that mindset, then you are not in command of your wholeness. You're not in command of your peace. You have given all of that to someone else. And in this moment right now, your peace, your wholeness, your freedom, that's your responsibility, because your mind, your body, your soul doesn't belong to anybody else. And it's no one else's responsibility. As an adult, you're an adult. As an adult, it's no one else's responsibility to take care of your mind, your body, and your soul but you. So you not feeling deserving, you not feeling good enough, you not feeling lovable, you not feeling worthy, that's your responsibility to acknowledge and honor and love and see and hold and heal and release. I keep talking about self-love in this conversation because it is so fundamental for self-forgiveness. For self-forgiveness is an act of self-love. And when you love yourself, you are empowering yourself. It is such a liberating thing to not depend on anyone else or any other conditions to give yourself love, to feel love for yourself, to embody the truth that you were born with, which is that you are unconditionally lovable. And only when you get to that place does forgiving yourself become a breeze, when it's no longer like riddled with inner conflict and then that cycle of like shame and guilt and that inner tug of war and all that exhaustion and frustration. When you learn to love yourself unconditionally, you learn to live in your truths, which are that you're whole exactly as you are, you're good exactly as you are, and that nothing makes you unlovable. That's your highest truth, and you're innately deserving of love because you're alive. That's your highest truth. And so when you learn to love yourself unconditionally, of course, being able to forgive yourself is going to be easier. And emotional health, I keep talking about this too, crucial for self-forgiveness. If you identify with your emotions, that means you have an unhealthy relationship with your emotions. That means that you lack emotional intelligence and you lack emotional maturity. And that means you lack emotional health. And so if you feel like, for instance, if you feel like feeling shame makes you a bad person, that's you identifying with your emotions. If you feel sad and desperate, then you're like, oh, I'm weak and I'm a sad person. That's you identifying with your emotions. Unfortunately, we're not taught emotional health. And that's why so many people have unhealthy relationships and beliefs about their emotions. But if you continue to operate from that place of dysregulation, from those limiting beliefs and all of that unresolved trauma, and you're unwilling to befriend your emotions, if you're unwilling to see your anger as a friend, or your resentment as a friend, your shame as a friend, instead of these awful bad parts of yourself, then forgiving yourself is going to be really challenging. Also because when you have all that emotional dysregulation, you have nervous system dysregulation, which means your ability to heal is going to be stunted because your brain and your body are hijacked. Your nervous system is hijacked by these unsuppressed and denied emotions. And that goes hand in hand with developing a healing relationship with your fears and traumas, crucial for self-forgiveness. So many people deny their fears. People believe that having fears makes them weak. And so a lot of people deny their traumas, or they believe that trauma is for people who've only suffered like great tragedies and abuse, but in reality, trauma is universal. Everyone has experienced some degree or some form of trauma because trauma is most often a result of interpersonal relationships that occur in childhood as adverse childhood experiences. Even if you had a great, amazing childhood, I would bet if you're struggling with your health, if you're struggling with your happiness, with your well-being in some way, if there are repetitive patterns in your life that are problematic, that there is unresolved trauma in you. Again, trauma is subjective. I'm going to do a whole episode about trauma next, and you should tune into that. But if you want to be able to forgive yourself, then you've got to be able to forgive your fears and your traumas. And so that's why developing a healing and healthy relationship with them is so critical. And that also means that when you do that, you're going to end up learning who your authentic self is and who your wounded self is, which is crucial for your ability to forgive yourself, because you can't be showing up for your life as your wounded self and then unconditionally love yourself. Those are two opposing experiences, because your wounded self, again, believes that you're not worthy of love, believes that you're broken or that something's wrong with you. So you have to reconcile those aspects, and you can only do that by developing a healing relationship with your fears and your traumas and your emotions. So let's go back to that victim consciousness when you learn to differentiate between your wounded and your authentic self, you are also going to learn to identify when that victim consciousness comes up that belongs to your wounded self, that keeps you from being able to forgive yourself because it keeps you feeling like a victim in some way. Now, regardless of whether or not we were victims of abuse or trauma or tragedy, our healing is our responsibility. We cannot identify as the victim, which by definition means like being powerless, and also heal ourselves. Healing is an act of self-empowerment. And so you can't defend a victim consciousness and also heal. And if you want to forgive yourself, that is what self-forgiveness is. It's an act of self-healing. So being a victim of a past trauma or abuse or a tragedy doesn't mean that you are currently a victim in your present life. I was a victim of many, many acts of various types of abuse all throughout my childhood because I was helpless as a child. But I am no longer a victim because I am an adult. I am no longer helpless because I can heal those traumas. So if you want to forgive yourself, then you've got to release that victim consciousness, learn how to look at those aspects of yourself with love, with empowerment as opposed to powerlessness. And this goes hand in hand, again, with releasing the need to blame and to point fingers. It's so crucial. No one's to blame. Blame is not a helpful concept for healing. Your healing journey is not a court of law. There's no verdict that is going to heal your traumas or free your inner child. Okay? I mean, that's the truth. You may have some temporary relief. Your ego may be stroked by vindication, but on a soul level, blame doesn't serve anything. And at the core, you are a soul. So yes, someone may have done something really shitty in the past, really awful, really hurtful, painful. That person may have been you. You may be the person who fucked up. I certainly fucked up so many times in my life. So many times. People make conscious or unconscious choices that have consequences. That's fact. But we can't change the past. So when we blame and we point fingers, we're just deflecting our unwillingness to take responsibility and accountability for our present healing, our present well-being. It's you avoiding looking at yourself, your feelings, your beliefs, your part in your own well-being. And when we blame, we innately withhold peace because we're not freeing ourselves. We're trapping ourselves in these limiting beliefs and these narratives where we're disempowered. And so that's why releasing the need to blame and point fingers is so crucial for being able to forgive yourself. So instead of withholding love and peace and freedom from yourself, which is what essentially you're doing by suppressing your emotions and thinking that only certain parts of you are lovable and denying or avoiding your fears and your traumas and defaulting to blaming and pointing fingers and holding on to that resentment, you're withholding peace from yourself because no one can give you peace. That's not anyone's responsibility to gift you. Your peace is 100% your responsibility and 100% in your command. So when you're unable to forgive yourself because you have an unhealthy relationship with yourself, with the aspects of yourself that need love and peace and freedom, you are withholding your ability to heal. So I hope that this episode has illuminated the fact that there are reasons that it is difficult for you to forgive yourself and that there are ways to make that process less challenging and more productive. And so I invite you to witness and love and accept the parts of yourself that need love and witnessing, that need grace and understanding and patience, the parts of yourself that feel tender, that are activated, that are angry, that feel unseen, unappreciated, and unloved. I invite you to give those parts of yourself space to exist without judgment, without condemning their existence. Because when you open your heart to yourself in that way, when you take a long and a deep breath with yourself and offer yourself compassion and acceptance, no matter what, you are granting yourself safety, and you are seeing yourself, and you are loving yourself. And in that, you can forgive yourself. Because the more that we hold on to resentment toward ourselves, the more that we reject ourselves, the less space our mind and our body and our souls have to feel joy and peace and liberation. And all of those things are synonymous with healing. We can't heal ourselves if we don't accept ourselves. We can't heal ourselves if we don't love ourselves. We can't heal ourselves if we don't forgive ourselves. So if you want to learn more about loving yourself, forgiving yourself, I invite you to read my book, Unconditional, You're Perfect As You Are, where I go really in depth about forgiveness and all the aspects of unconditional self-love and self-healing. Thank you so much for joining me today in The Simple Source. I hope this episode has inspired you, reminded you of your healing power, and reawakened you to who your true and highest self is. If the show has empowered and enlightened your self-love, growth, and healing journey, please share this episode, leave a positive review on Apple or Spotify, and subscribe to be reminded of new episodes. I am so grateful for your presence, and all of your comments and your support are seen and read and deeply appreciated. They really do help this show so much. Also, sign up for my newsletter, The Weekly Source, to get more healing tips, motivation stories, and to get to know me better. And if you haven't read my book, Unconditional, You Are Perfect As You Are, I invite you to get your copy today and start reading. And lastly, I would love to see you inside my Source membership, the only holistic and comprehensive step-by-step self-healing program that is proven to work. It's time to stop struggling to heal and time to learn how to thrive more simply and joyfully. All the links are in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me today, and I will see you next time.